So I'm being joined by Hoon Lee, who is the voice of Master Splinter on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on Nickelodeon. So tell me a little bit about your version of Master Splinter, because we've seen a couple variations on him throughout media.
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, it's any of these characters are a collaboration of the designers and the writers, and the voice actor brings hopefully some piece of himself and the performance to it, but I see Splinter as this idea that was brought to me, and then it was my job to try to figure out how to articulate him. But I'd say the main difference is that obviously he's bigger, he's younger, and he's more vital than in previous manifestations. And that's brought a lot of different kinds of challenges, because whereas a small, sort of older, frailer, wizened character, you might assume that he's not adventuring with the turtles because of physical constraint. Now you really have to ask the question why he isn't above ground with them, why he doesn't participate more. And that leads to different answers. It leads to questions about his history and about his morality and about his fear and vulnerability. And that makes the character, I think, it gives the character potential for more depth and more richness, and it makes the interactions between this sort of father figure and his children more complex, and in many ways I think much more true to life. All fathers are constantly in the process every day of figuring out how to be a father, and I think we see that a bit more with Splinter.
Awesome. Now, since we've moved on from, I believe you're moving to season 2, correct?
Yeah.
So since we're going to season 2,
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Do you have a lot more control or any actual input with the writers at this point, or?
Oh, I see. Not so much. I mean, I think that they have a very, very solid hand on what they're doing. For one thing, I wouldn't second guess them personally. I just feel that the way they've steered the ship has just been impeccable. I've been a huge fan of the show, our show, since it aired. And a lot of people don't really think about this, but as voice actors, we don't see the end product until the audience does most of the time. So I get to sort of come along for the ride and enjoy it. I was very nervous at the top of season 1 that this was going to be, I was worried about what could go wrong, that it wouldn't be well received. So the fact that it's been embraced has been wonderful, but it's allowed me to participate as a fan as well. And like as any fan would, I want to be told the story. I don't really want to tell the story. So I feel it's very fortunate that I don't have the slightest impulse to try to help the story along, nor do I think I really could. I get to discover the scripts, and I'm biting my nails along with everyone else. I'm kind of going, oh, that's great, along with everyone else. I just get to do it a little bit in advance. But in terms of input, I would say the one thing that does happen naturally is writers will tend to write to the voices they hear. So the longer you sit with a role, the more sort of comfortable it's going to feel as you start to deliver the lines. And I can definitely feel that was already happening in season 1. So.
Now, did they ever have something that they had written that they said, wow, before we actually had a voice actor, we wrote it this way, but we actually changed it to fit your voice better?
I think that sort of evolution happens somewhat all along the way. There will be tweaks in the recording process. There will be adjustments. I can make suggestions on that kind of small scale in terms of, how about we try this? Should we move this around, etc. It's very much a feeling out process, but I see it as a large part of my job to honor what's there. And, I feel that as an actor, if you don't want people telling you all the time how to act, it's not fair of you to tell other people how to do their jobs all the time as well. And so you have that give and take a little bit, but you also trust people to do their jobs, and I'm very happy to say that's always been the case on this show. Any adjustments that have been made have generally come because of something that slipped through the cracks, because maybe people weren't hearing it before it was vocalized, but not necessarily because something was wrong or felt off. And I think they've got a very solid handle on Splinter's voice, and I feel very at home with it. So.
Fantastic. Actually, that does lead into another question that I had, which was, so initially it was, are you a fan before the series started? Good, okay.
Yeah.
So when you got the chance, and they said, hey, we want you to play Master Splinter, did you just jump on it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I freaked out a little bit. It's these kind of stages where you go, I'm never gonna get this job. That's impossible. And then you go, oh, maybe I will get this job. And then you get the job and you go, yes! And then there's immediate panic where you're like, oh, now I have to do a good job at this job. And particularly when you are a fan of the property or the characters or the stories, you feel a certain weight of responsibility to the fans that have come before, and to the legacy that has been left behind by other actors, by other incarnations of the show. At the same time, you have to forge new ground to make sure that it's still relevant and to make sure that you are hopefully bringing these characters and these stories and the things you loved about it to a new audience. And that's been really gratifying. The most gratifying part about season 1 was the way that existing fans who were perhaps initially skeptical have embraced the show. Nothing makes me prouder than that. And with the possible exception that I'm very proud of the show as one of those fans, and that's been a tremendous boost in confidence.
Because I will admit, we have had our hearts broken before, so...
Oh my gosh, and you know, that's why whenever I see something like people railing against, this new Ben Affleck thing, right, you know, I'm just like, give the guy a chance, because there's so much baggage that comes with this. It's a no-win situation. And it's like, if you're a fan, I think what you really want is you want some great new version to come out that you can call your own, that you can show your kids maybe, that you want something new into the mix that's going to keep everything charged and vital. And so it kind of works against yourself to start getting all pessimistic about it before you've even seen it. And so I'm trying to adopt more of that attitude. Having lived through it now, it's really tamed my fanboy rage in general, like across the board. So now when Ben Affleck gets announced, I'm like, go for it, Ben Affleck. I'm behind you. Let's
see what you can do.
I mean, you'd love it. You'd love it if someone came into to a new property and just knocked it out of the park. That's what everyone wants. So why not root for that? You know. Anyway.
Oh, awesome. So, in your research, because I imagine it's probably some of the most fun research you've had to do, in your research, did you find something in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle lore that you maybe didn't know beforehand?
You know, actually, I'd say a lot, because what I realized was that I read the comics so long ago that my memory was just terrible, just horrible, and that's just getting old, and also not being a terribly smart person to begin with. You're working from a slightly diminished position, but you get to these things, and you go, oh, I remember these things very, very clearly. But the details are what start to get lost more and more. And the thing that I really felt I remembered so strongly about the original books that took me aback was how serious the book could be, how dark in tone it could be. And that was the thing that I felt was often somewhat passed over in earlier incarnations. And there are moments in our show which get quite dark and quite serious and have a lot of gravitas to them. And I loved that they embraced that. So I would say in some ways it wasn't that I learned something new because there were so many things I had to remember. It's that I recognized something from before, and I was so glad that they had embraced that as part of the overall DNA of the show and of the characters. So in some ways it was a rediscovery more than a remembering.
Fantastic. Now, would you say that you have a preference for a certain style of acting, like whether it be on stage, in film, or even just the voiceovers?
They're very different things. And I guess in some ways, in each medium, what you're trying to achieve is a certain level of recognizable truth. Like that's a very loaded word, I know, and it's perhaps a bit too much of a capital letter word, but in the sense that you want people to recognize something that they feel is really valid and that really resonates with them. And the tools you use to do that in each medium are pretty different. And the way that the performances are captured and then transmitted to people are very different as well, even though there's a lot of overlap. So I would say that rather than a medium that I prefer, there's sort of a mode where feel like if something is very hard to access, if something presents a very strong challenge, and you end up working at it quite hard, you are able to reap a much greater reward. And that little nugget that you might bring to the table can be quite small, but if it's honestly mined, then I think it shines that much brighter, and it really creates a connection. And each medium has their challenge in that way. So in some ways, as long as something is really hard, that's the sort of pursuit that ends up being the most rewarding.
And now, what would you say is probably the hardest part of voiceover work?
The hardest part of voiceover work, oh man, the hardest part of voiceover work is trying to get. It's for me on this job. I'll say in this job, the hardest part is keeping up. I think that the voice talent we have on the show is really exceptional, and I learn a lot from listening to my colleagues. And for me, it's constantly being on my toes and knowing that I have to keep my game quite high in order to make sure that we are all of a piece. It's somewhat infuriating sometimes because it seems quite easy for some of these people, but I think that that's the most challenging thing, is just kind of keeping an awareness that I have to bring a certain level of energy and a certain sort of quality of delivery to each and every session in order to make sure that I'm not the weak link in the show. But that's a great challenge. That's a great environment to be in.
Fantastic. I just have one more
Sure.
quick thing, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Could you say in Splinter voice, thank you for watching nerdcaliber.com?
I just want to say to everybody, thank you for watching Nerd Caliber.